Bomani, I'm Will. It's great to meet you. Great to have you on the show. And for me personally, this is a treat as a longtime Around the Horn fan. This is like a dream come true for me. I've joked on the show before, but when I was unemployed, like Around the Horn, if I could make it to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I was like, the hounds of despair could be quieted for a second because I'm listening to Woody Page yell at Bob Bryant.
No, unemployment, you just need something to look forward to. That is the key to when you don't have a job.
I was like, the existential crisis will begin tomorrow morning, but the day is over for the time being.
Well, the other thing about unemployment is that it makes you realize the only thing you do in your day that doesn't cost money is go to work. Everything else costs money.
Just a little bit more blood leaving your body every time you leave the door. But so anyway, just to begin, I'm joined now by the host of Game Theory on HBO, Bomani Jones. Bomani, thanks for hanging out with us.
No, man, no problem.
So we wanted to have you on to, it's Super Bowl week, and we wanted to have you on to discuss labor issues in professional sports. And it occurs to me that sports is about as high a profile platform for employer and employee relations and collective bargaining that we have in this country, but it's one that's often goes unremarked upon or scoffed at because of the size of the salaries and the celebrity of the athletes in question. But Bomani, this year, these labor issues in sports have been forced into a very vivid focus as a result of Damar Hamlin's near-death experience. So just to begin, how would you assess both the NFL and the sports media's handling of the way this showed a particularly harsh light on contractual issues in sports and the NFL in particular?
Well, I think the thing to remember about sports media is, especially now that the newspaper industry has been decimated, and an underrated factor, which is online operations just don't see the profit in long form stuff. So they're giving you much, more bite-sized things, and labor issues are not bite-sized, right? And so you wind up with the people who most prominently cover these issues. They didn't get into it to talk about labor issues. It's not really why they're here. And so what they're good at is talking to people and finding out what the discussion is. Are they necessarily that good in getting into the weeds of what all this stuff is? In most cases, probably not. And I don't blame them for it, because that's not what the jobs are that they got into, that they started for. And so what then happens as a result is, when something comes up that has to do with collective bargaining, you really don't talk about it until it's a rubber meets the road situation of you might miss games, at which point the discussion is about missing the games. And the numbers that get thrown out are really, really, really big, right? We start talking about billions of dollars, and it's like, we offered the players X billions of dollars. But, then you do division, and you're like, hey, so what is this billion, what's that billion mean per player? What's that billion mean over a stretch of time, whatever it is? But I don't think that the sports media typically views those things properly, or at least I don't think does the best job of conveying those things to the people. They're also conveying those things to people who have been primed for decades to be anti-labor, right? And so they look at, these guys are really, really rich. Why aren't they satisfied with being really, really rich? But in the NFL in particular, most of those guys aren't rich, right? Like, I have been fortunate enough to make a lot of money doing what I do. And one thing that happens when you make a lot of money, you learn how much money you don't make, because all it does is really put you into rooms with people where you realize, whoa, they've got way more money. Like when I lived in Miami, I lived on Collins at 50th Street, right, in what they called Millionaire Row at the time. And I used to look out the window across the Intercoastal Waterway, and there was this dude that had this gorgeous house and this spectacular looking boat, right? Just an amazing looking boat. And I just imagined that every day he looked outside, and you know what he saw? He saw the dude next door who was just shitting all over his boat. like that dude's boat next door was a completely...
His boat has a helicopter pad on it.
Yeah, it was just a completely different world of boat than what he was talking about. Like, there's levels to this money thing. But the level that the average football player is in, especially for the first 4 years of his career, if he's not a first or second round pick, those dudes don't really have that much money, and they're trading their bodies in order to get what is ultimately not that much money. It sounds like, because you're like, yo, you make $500,000 a year. But most people that make $500,000 a year spend a lot of time along the way making money. And after that $500,000 a year, will spend more time making more money. These dudes are coming in paying percentages to agents, marketing people, whoever happens to be, then the guys that have to train you to keep you into shape, and then all this stuff, and then to get on the back end of a career where you might not have health insurance.
Like, yeah, it only lasts like how long? The average career in the NFL. I mean, the toll it takes on your body. And then in the NFL in particular, there's the issue of no guaranteed money in the contracts. So if you get injured, like the Mets are still paying Bobby Bonilla like $1 million a year based on a contract he signed in the 80s or something like that. But in the NFL, it all could go away tomorrow if you get hurt.
Yeah, no, it's a trick bag. And then for them, organized labor in the NFL is trickier than I'd say any of the other sports, because you basically have 4 classifications of players. You have superstar quarterbacks, and they're the ones that make the gazillions of dollars. You have starting level quarterbacks, and they get paid on a certain level. Then you have star players, and those guys tend to make a lot of money, and you hear about their contracts. And then you got basically everybody else. Like, they changed the collective bargaining agreement in 2011 in such a way that greatly incentivized keeping rookies, because it raised the veterans' minimums up. And so they were then just going to get rookies for cheaper that might be reasonably similar caliber players. And so it became much more of a haves and have-nots sort of league. And that's what we're seeing more and more of in the NFL. But what that also meant is that short career, it gets shorter, because there's just a greater incentive now to get the younger player that you can pay less money. And so, like with Hamlin, it came up and it was worrisome for people, because if Hamlin never plays another game, he is invested in any sort of way. And he's not a dude that got like a $10 million signing bonus coming out of school. Like, that would probably be it for him making money as a football player.
And could you explain that a little bit more? It was one of the things in the coverage of this that I was like sort of astonished to find out, because as a second-year player, he was not fully vested, and the NFL made an exception in this case, because otherwise he potentially could have had no health coverage for nearly dying.
Yes, that is correct. You've got, I forget what the number of years is that you have to play. It might be 3, but it's not terribly different than retirement systems elsewhere, where you have to put in for a certain amount of time before it is that you can get the coverage on the back end. Like, when the ACA was a thing, trying to get it pushed through, it was former football players who were really all on board with it, because their whole lives are, they're living, breathing, pre-existing conditions. And so if you don't wind up getting that money, and getting that vesting, how you're supposed to take care of yourself after the fact, I really don't have any idea of that. And the person in general really just hears about those big numbers and doesn't give it any more thought. But the deal is not nearly as good as advertised, especially in the NFL.
And, sports in the NFL in particular is in many ways, like as close to like a national religion as America has, football. And I'm sure the NFL, they'd be happy if that shield was just the new American flag. But, but in a lot of ways, it reflects a lot of like the darker things about what, the American character, like the violence, the hierarchy. But like in the Damar Hamlin thing, I felt like that whole week where it was an open question about like whether this guy would wake up, it felt like, can we even watch football anymore? But then as soon as he was okay, and thank God for that, it was sort of seamlessly integrated into this very like feel-good story.
Yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it? Like, I'll just never forget. He woke up and said, "Did we win?" And everybody else was like, "Oh, okay, we can go back to what it is."
Thank God I can watch the playoffs. I can enjoy it without guilt.
Yeah. And like, I don't know. My acceptance game is kind of strong, right? And 4 agreements or whatever it is. My acceptance game is fairly impeccable. And this is a brutal, grotesque game. That's part of what makes it fascinating, right? Like, I think that people want to ignore that part of it, that a level of the intrigue of this is that it is wildly unsafe. Right? Like, this is not nearly as interesting to watch if people aren't making the sacrifices that they are, and how much you have to really want this to do it, given how dangerous it is. That's a big part of this. And so when something happens that really puts it into focus, nobody wants to feel like a bad person. And so everybody goes through the, oh man, I don't know if I can keep watching this or whatever it is. And then they just get that one flicker that says it's okay. And then they realize, oh yeah, I've been doing this the whole way, right? We all have things that we are willing to turn down what we would term some levels of our own morality in order to consume, or we're willing to ignore some of those, snippy, biting things that we hear in the back of our heads. Football is the one for more people than anything else, I would probably say. Like, you hear the way people talk about football is the way they talk about alcohol, right?
They're like, it's great every once in a while, once a week or whatever. But
yeah, they're like, I'm never going to drink again after I had that horrible night. Yeah, I bet you won't. I bet you won't.
Yeah, but I saw Steve Young on that week where DeMar Hamlin was in the hospital, and he said that it's the risk in football that makes it exciting. And because of that risk, and the men who play it, they're certainly aware of that risk, probably now more so than ever, about what the long-term effects of this are. But as an adult, you should, young man, you should be able to decide for yourself whether you're willing to take on that risk for the reward it might give you. But because of the nature of how violent it is, doesn't that bring into stark the stark need for protections for players in terms of healthcare and money?
I would think so.
If you're willing to risk yourself for that, to earn all this money for a football owner or team or franchise, well then the risk you're taking should be rewarded in commensurate amount.
Yeah, and the thing we have to remember, my buddy Dominic Fosberg and I talk about this, as much as we can say the guys know the risk when they get into it, this decision is really made when these dudes are 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah.
The decision that this is what I want to do is made well before anybody can truly absorb and grasp the consequences. And by the time you're fully invested in this and you've gone through an educational process that really ain't been that concerned with educating you, and you spent these years in college where the primary concern for your course selection is making sure that you can, make it to practice and everything else, what other decision are you going to make? Right?
You're right. That's a really good point, because nobody who becomes a professional athlete just picks up the sport they play at 18 or 20 and is just I'm going to give a go at this.
Yeah,
they've been doing it their whole lives.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. That's probably not going to be it. And so the dream and everything else has been molded so early that they know the risk argument. I was talking to Fosworth about this, and I was like, I'm more in line with that as more information has become available about these things. And then I realized, nope, I was just saying the thing I needed to say to myself. That's really what that came back to. I was probably just saying the thing that I need to say for myself. And I do think for most of these dudes, not all, but I mean, it's not even say most. A lot of them, they get to the other side and the pain and everything else they deal with, they still do it all over again if it came down to it. But there are quite a few, no way they'd make that trade again if they knew what they knew going into it on the front end. I think about the fact that graduate school was harder than anybody could ever tell me. I can't imagine what playing football is.
Yeah. And another thing you brought up on your show is a small thing, but something that's always annoyed me whenever I watch championship level team games, is that when they give the trophy to the winner, the person who hoists it is the owner of the team. And I'm just wondering about this in the context of the ways in which fans of sports in America are sort of conditioned or willing to identify more with the owners and managers of teams than the athletes who they root for.
Yeah. I mean, this really jumps out of the NFL. They call all the owners Mr. and Mrs. they call them all Mr. whatever it is. Not just the people who work for them, the people who cover them. There's a level of respect that's conferred upon somebody for owning a sports team that I don't think you get if you run the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art. I don't it is amazing how we have made these people into the sort of dignitaries that they have become. And then that trophy celebration, when we did that on Game Theory, and we saw that, it is wild. They get to have the trophy before anybody else does. And I guess, hey, man, if I put billions of dollars into it, I would probably ask for a couple of perks too. But there is a new fascination that I think it goes not really, I don't think that the average person relates to the owner that much. But I do think that there's a heavy contingent of sports fans who now relate to the general manager. I don't know how much
fantasy football.
Yes,
it's
that's
you're not
exactly
rooting
what I was
for your
about
team.
to
You
say.
have your own team, and that you're making the trades and decisions. And
because that's something you can be, right? And it is fun, to do it on the PlayStation where you run the team and you make all the trades, whatever. I get that, but I do not watch sports for the people I can relate to. I watch sports for the people I can never be. Right?
Yeah,
like
I'm not a demigod. You know, I want to see achievement on a level that I can dream of.
Yeah, like how self-absorbed do you have to be to require that the most interesting thing about sports be the thing that's like you? The whole point is that these people are not like you.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to be like Mike, but, you know, that's never going to fucking happen.
Right. Like I remember all the times I spent in my driveway, like pretending to be athletes, right? Pretending to be Michael Jordan, pretending to be whoever the person was, trying to make those shots, right? Like doing the call in my head of the clock going down and everything else, right? Like it was the ultimate. Like, as I look back on it, I'd almost forgotten how much of that I had done, right? Because I'm like old and jaded now. But like I think about all of that. I just can't imagine going from that and then looking at these general managers and being like, yeah, these guys, no.
Yeah. When I grow up, I want to be like Dan Snyder on a Wheaties box.
I don't understand people who become accounting majors as freshmen. It's like, damn, you gave up already?
Bomani, another segment you did recently on game theory that I want to ask you about is you did a really good segment that was talking about LeBron and this like idea of player empowerment that like he is sort of pitching or being ascribed to him. And you used it as an example, a really interesting example of the difference between having cultural power and having like actual political ownership power. Could you talk a little bit about that segment?
Yeah. So when LeBron went to Miami in 2010, the idea was that he had demonstrated his power by making this move, and it ushered in this era of player empowerment. But in reality, and these are some of the ideas that we weren't able to get into the essay, all he really did was make a bunch of white people mad. And I do guess that as a black person, the ability to make white people mad while also making tens of millions of dollars did feel kind of new. But that's really all he did was kind of offend people's sensibilities or the idea that you stay in the hometown or whatever it was. Mm-hmm. But in order for him to make that move, he had to take less money. And by the way, went to a team that does not give players power. Right? He wasn't running the organization. He wasn't doing any of those things. He then left and went to Cleveland, where he definitely did have more of a role in running the organization. But stop and think about that. What we're calling power is the ability to do somebody else's job for them. Like, I would like going to a restaurant and being like, you know what? I'll just make it myself. Like that doesn't feel like the customer's always right when such a thing happens. And so we hear so much about the idea of LeBron as player empowerment, LeBron as player and player empowerment. But in the end, it's a league that has a salary cap. It's a league that has maximum salaries that prevents how much a guy like LeBron James can ultimately make. And even in the direction of cultural player empowerment, where LeBron's used his voice in some very strong ways, we learned the limits of his power when Tamir Rice got shot by the cops in his own city. And 1 year later, he said he still hadn't had time to research it, so he would not be commenting because he realized all he could do in that situation in his own city was make it worse. And so what I think happens with the idea of player empowerment, or why it became such an intoxicating idea to people, is we want to feel like we're not getting exploited by all this capitalism, right? And if even LeBron James is a relatively powerless sort in his own world, what in the world does that say about us? Because by the way, not only are we kind of powerless, we're kind of content to just sit here and take it as long as you pay us enough money, right? Yeah. So we want to feel like LeBron is like, nah, he stuck it to them with these moves. Yeah, he only takes 1 year contracts to put their feet to the fire. Stop and think about this for a second. In order to ensure that your bosses do their jobs competently, you have to do things that give you less security and make you less money. What power is there in that? And so I just look at a dude like him, and he's made a lot of money off the court, and he's making power moves in that way. But ultimately, the modern athlete has more money than he has power. And I think that people misunderstand and think that power and money are perfect substitutes when they're not.
Well, I mean, like we said, just like people hear the salaries that athletes get made, and they're like, oh, well, why do you need a labor union? But the point you made in that segment is that LeBron James may be the most underpaid professional athlete in sports history, considering the value that he creates for a franchise versus like what his salary is.
Yes.
But you said it's like that's okay for him because he makes so much money through like advertising and endorsements and things like that.
But think about what we're saying there. It's cool, LeBron. You can just go get a second job. It just so happens that the second jobs pay a lot of money. But that's how we are now conditioned as labor to think, is that we look at somebody like LeBron, and I understand the difficulty in finding any notion of solidarity in, somebody who makes as much money as LeBron James. But we look at LeBron and then we're like, oh, but it's cool. You can get that money elsewhere. Hold up. Why can't I get that money from you? Like what's going on right now with college athletics and the name, image, and likeness stuff is very, very interesting because the NCAA just pulled the greatest con ever, which is they've been kicking their feet and fighting and refusing to pay players forever. And then finally looked up and said, you know what? Fine. We'll let other people do it. How about that? And they still don't have to pay. Like just because these guys can get somebody else to come off the money doesn't mean that they're not underpaid. And that's the same thing that happens in basketball and these other sports is just because they can find other ways to get money or just because they make a lot of money doesn't mean they're not getting sold short as it is. Now, part of why they're getting sold short is they're really bad at organizing because everybody's interests are so disparate, but underpaid nonetheless.
Well, and speaking of, solidarity and organizing, the example you used of the averted NBA labor strike that took place during the bubble season that were like, and you were very critical of LeBron for essentially just calling up his friend Obama and then who was just sort of like, yeah, you don't strike, but like in not striking, you'll have more power to use your platform to bring attention to these issues. And like they just totally swallowed it.
Yeah, no, I think for those guys, Obama is an idea. And so it would make perfect sense. We got to figure out what to do. If you were just thinking of people to get advice from and you have Barack Obama in your phone, logically, it stands to reason. Yo, why don't you call 44? Okay, cool. You call 44. But if you're not thinking about Obama in some of these other terms, you're kind of like, yo, man, he is definitely going to tell you to take your ass back to work. Like that's who he is. That's what he's about. But I also would say, in fairness to Obama about that, I imagine that Obama might have hit him back with, so what do you want? Like that's the one thing about an impromptu strike. We didn't really have that much time to put together a list of the things we want. Like to give you an example of what was going on in the bubble. A lot of people had jokes. I was probably one of them. I just can't remember. But when they had all the little slogans on the back of the jerseys, right? Equality, justice, all those things. NBA people will be quick to tell you, people in the league, they did not shoot down any slogan that was put before them. Those were the things that the players came up with themselves, right? There was nothing revolutionary or anything close to it in any of those statements. They limited themselves. Like they were aware themselves of what was going too far. So when it was like, so what do you want before you have this strike? I know they got on the phone with the people in Wisconsin to try to change some law, which I thought that was a fairly like strong move to make. If you were, that the Bucks could pull that off, like that would be a thing. But what exactly was it that they were ready to do or ready to ask for in that moment, other than like nicer accommodations in this hotel they've been stuck in for weeks?
Bomani, it's not like directly related to labor issues in sports, but it certainly is directly related to capitalism in sports. And you did a segment on crypto in which you like very very early on ably called out what a scam this all was. But the thing I want to ask you about, and like the most startling and seemingly it happened like overnight, it seems like a sea change in sports or watching sports on TV, is the fact that every commercial, if you watch a game now, every other commercial is for a gambling website that is entreating you to bet money on the game you're watching. And this used to be like the most verboten thing in sports, that you could like mix coverage of a sport with, just like making book as a bookie. I mean, I don't really know how to frame the question, but just what do you make of the sudden mass proliferation of online gambling and being advertised during sports games?
Well, I think there are a couple levels. One is a bit more idyllic. Bob Costas was making this point when I was working on the show with him, that none of us got into this to gamble, right? People who really enjoy sports, that's not why we got into it. And it's becoming a very transactional relationship in a way that I guess as I get older and perhaps more sentimental, that I look at and kind of frown upon just a little bit. But I think as it relates to the capitalism, the biggest thing for me is this is the function of like the growth economy, right? Like the thing about these companies and as they go in their valuations are all predicated on some idea of growth. Making money is not enough. You have to make more money than you did last year. And eventually any business like this is going to reach some steady state where there's just not that much more money that you're able to make. But this was always the one that was sitting there, right? Like this is like the Godfather and the Mafia trying to decide if they were going to start selling dope. Like the money's right there. Are you really going to walk away from it once the laws made it possible? And so they've gone all in on this, and they say that their numbers are telling them that people want this content. What I think happens with it, particularly with television, is you need a reason for people to turn on the TV. And knowing that if you're trying to figure out the line on these games and the crawl is going to have them all go, and somebody might sit here for 4 or 5 minutes to see all of these things, well, that'll make people turn on their TVs. And then we're giving them all the over-under on the various prop bets and everything else. I know a lot of people gamble on sports. I really, really do. What I'm trying to understand is, are you really just taking gambling advice from any damn body? Because we'll put anybody on television and say they're the gambling person, and people will take their advice. And all they got to do is act like they gamble a lot. That's it. Everybody's guessing. We are all guessing. But gambling is the one form of entertainment in this society that gives you the chance to get your money back, right?
Yeah, it's like the Simpsons joke when they were making fun of Jimmy the Greek, and he goes, "Folks, when you're right 51% of the time, you're wrong the other 49." He's like, "You should have told me that before you."
And that's what it is. But hey, man, the house stays open on 52.
Yeah,
you know, like that's. I mean, it's. I am not a gambler. It's never really been my bag. I do enjoy hearing people's stories of their bad beats. Like I find those to be very, very entertaining. But I don't think, in terms of building long-term interest in sports, I don't think that all this emphasis on gambling is good. Like if I'm a kid and I'm trying to get into sports, that's not helping. What gets you into sports is, and they're having trouble with this, by the way, the youngsters, I don't know if it's just because they don't go outside no more or nothing like that, but the youngsters aren't really jumping on the sports like they had in previous generations. And I don't think leaning toward gambling content is going to get them there.
Well, at the end of the day, gambling is just kind of math. You know,
yes,
like it is just numbers. So
right, but it's math. But it's math where your decision is based on something set by people who are not just better at math than you, but have a clear profit motive.
The only man I will take gambling advice from is Sam Ace Rothstein.
Oh yeah, I'm there. I'd be there. I'd be there on that one.
You gotta have the inside knowledge. Well, Bomani, I know you got a tight schedule, and I really thank you for your time. But if I could, I'd just like to get you out with a few quick, like actual, like sports questions, like actual sports talk radio questions. I'm gonna put my Tony Reali hat on and fire a couple around the horn style questions at you. So, first one, big news in the NBA: Kyrie to the Mavs. So, does picking up another ball handler to take pressure off Luka make sense for Dallas, or is he going to red pill the team so hard on the JFK assassination that they stop caring about the playoffs?
The answer is yes. And oh my goodness, I had not thought about Kyrie's field trip to Dealey Plaza. That definitely is going to take place now that he is in Dallas. Wow. Had not considered that. Now, I do think that the helping Luka is going, like that part is going to be good. Right. The problem is I don't know who the Mavericks are going to guard. And at some point, this is going to go bad. That's the thing. The only thing I will say about that, though, is Kyrie was on his best behavior once he realized that his dream of a max contract really wasn't going to happen until he was on his best behavior. So it is possible that he gets down there and winds up on his best behavior, and the Mavericks just lie to him all year. I'm like, sure, we can talk about a max contract after the season. Sure, we can talk about it after the season. Ain't nobody give him no damn max contract. Not for max years.
I'm just thinking, his trip to Dealey Plaza, triangulation of fire, sort of triangle offense, do the math, stay woke.
Let me tell you this. Have you been to Dealey Plaza?
Oh, I definitely have. We did a show in Dallas last year, and we did a whole JFK tour with a listener to the show who's a big, Kennedy historian.
Did you see the weirdos laying in the street where the X's are for the shots that have pictures taken of them?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I didn't lay in the street, but when the traffic subsided, I did go out there and stand on the X and just give a big thumbs up.
Yeah, that was okay. These people were laid out like they just got shot in the back of the head.
Dealey Plaza is cool, though. I recommend it. It's a good tourist experience. Okay, next question, and this is personal for me. Will the New York Knicks make a significant run in the playoffs, or will they be attending mandatory JD and the Straight Shot concerts in the postseason?
I hope they make a run in the playoffs because, man, that year, that was in 2021, where they were doing a little something in the playoffs, this city was so happy. Yeah. Like, I've come to develop an affection for Knicks fans because y'all really love that team. I went to see the Knicks and the Hornets this year. It was the first time I've been to Madison Square Garden for a basketball game. And I just could not believe the level of investment from that crowd in a regular season basketball game. You guys really care a lot. And that might get you to the second round.
Okay, good enough. And then finally, of course, the big game coming up on Sunday. So, Bomani, will the Philadelphia Eagles eat shit losing against Miracle Mahomes and the Chiefs, or will the Eagles fans eat shit when they win another Super Bowl?
Man, let me tell you, I feel like the Eagles, team-wise, should win this game. I'm just not in the business of picking against the greatest football player greatest quarterback I've ever seen. Football player is hard to go, but quarterback, I ain't never seen anything like this. I just don't feel right betting against that guy. I just can't.
Miracle Mahomes. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Bomani, I want to thank you so much for your time. The show is Game Theory on HBO.
Appreciate it, Matt.
Thanks for being here.
All right, no problem.